Chava hadn't slept in 3 nights. Something in the air, the way the waves murmured against the shore, kept tugging at him the moment he closed his eyes. That night, long past midnight, he gave up entirely. Barefoot and restless, he wandered down the moonlight beach that curled around the tiny town. The ocean smelled wrong. At first he thought it was just a tide, low and rotten, as it sometimes got in the summer heat. But then he saw it, a shape hunched near the waterline, as if the sea had coughed it onto the sand. It was humanoid. Pale flesh gleamed beneath the moonlight, slick and swollen like something half-formed. A faint hiss rose from its body. Then the smell hit him. It made his eyes water, and as he stared, the thing twitched. Its ribs pushed up. Its limbs lengthened. It was growing. Chava didn't scream, he just turned and ran. He tore through the quiet streets, shouting until lights flicked on and doors opened. His mother was the first to reach him, gripping his shoulders as he stumbled for breath. When he dragged her and a handful of neighbors back to the beach, even their lanterns seemed to hesitate in the dark. Then they saw it. A collective gasp broke the silence. Someone whispered a prayer. The creature's bulk was larger now, aching, as though something inside wanted out. Chava's mother grabbed his arm. "Get the bruja," she said, voice trembling. "Now." He sprinted to the edge of town where the old woman lived. She was already awake, staring out her window as though she had been expecting him. She followed him without a word. Back on the beach, she planted an old driftwood log into the sand, struck a match, and let the flames climb. Her eyes never left the creature. "Burn it," she told Chava, "before the devil's tail curls again." He blinked. "Devil's tail? That is what Chicxulub means," she whispered, her voice like gravel. "And his sting is a reminder." Chava swallowed his fear, took the burning log and shoved it into the creature's body. It screamed, not with a voice, but with the rush of air that made the sand dance. The skin blackened, split, and then collapsed inward. When it was over, only a charred skeleton remained, like the husk of something that should never have lived. He walked the bruja home afterward, shaken but relieved. The night air felt cooler, calmer, until he began hearing, whispering, faint and curling through the dark like voices drifting up from beneath the sand. He blinked, looked around, and realized the old woman was no longer beside him. Panic rising in his throat, he ran to her house. The door was open. Inside, something metallic stung his nose. Blood, so much of it. It painted the walls in spiraling, jagged symbols he couldn't understand. The candles were burnt down to nubs, and on the bed lay the bruja, throat slit wide and dried, her body stiff and cold. She had been dead for hours. Yet he walked home with her. The whispers rose again, crawling into his ears like insects. Chava bolted from the house, stumbling into the night as the symbols on the walls seemed to pulse behind him, alive with some secret he wished he had never learned. Michael Altman has spent the last week hunched over seismic graphs in the cramped field laboratory on the edge of Chicxulub. Inside, computer screens glow with a faint pulse, an anomaly deep beneath the crater's heart. A gravitational tremor, rhythmic and impossible. James Field, his partner, had given up trying to understand it. Equipment glitch, Field muttered for the 100th time as he packed his bag. But Altman couldn't shake the feeling that the data wasn't lying. Something down there was pooling. He spent his days interviewing fellow researchers, wandering between universities, private labs, and makeshift dig sites that dotted the town. Most dismissed him. Others avoided answers entirely. A few simply looked disturbed, as though he asked a question he wasn't supposed to. Then one afternoon, his phone rang. A voice, low and calm and unfamiliar. told him to meet at the local bar. 8 o'clock, come alone. Before he could respond, the line went dead. Altman almost laughed it off. A prank. It wasn't a big place, and so rumors traveled faster than storms. He went home instead. Ada Chavez was already there, hair tied back, shirt stained with the dust of ancient ruins. Her work as an anthropologist had taken her deep into local folklore, and recently she had grown uneasy. People are talking, she said, as he dropped his bag on the kitchen counter. Old stories, myths they don't tell outsiders. Altman frowned. About what? He hesitated before speaking. They call it the tale of the devil. Something buried in the center of the crater, something that shouldn't be disturbed. They made Altman pause. He'd heard the translation before, but only now did the weight settle over him. The anomaly, the secrecy, the reluctance of the locals. Something is down there. Altman grabbed his coat. What are you doing? Ada asked. I'm going to meet the man who called me. The bar was dim, lit by a single flickering sign that buzzed in the humid air. Altman took a seat in the corner. Minutes later, a man slid into the booth across from him. Broad-shouldered, nervous. Charles Hammond, he introduced himself. Freelance installations. Currently working for DredgerCorp. Altman recognized the name. Whispers of a corporation that had arrived quietly, buying land and equipment with unsettling speed. Hammond leaned in. You've been poking around the crater, asking questions no one else is stupid enough to ask. Altman stiffened. Hammond continued. There's a pulse coming from the center of the crater, not seismic, not electrical. A signal, and DredgerCorp knows it. Altman felt cold. Hammond explained how he checked with every other corporation. They detected it too. Everyone knew the pulse was there, yet no one talked about it. When I told DredgerCorp, they didn't ask what I found. They asked who else I told. He swallowed hard. That's when I realized something bigger is going on. And whatever's inside that crater, it's not man-made. Why come to me? Altman asked. Hammond gave a humorous smile. Because you're the only one who's kept asking, when everyone else shut up. Everyone's been bought or scared, but you're not. The conversation ended with no answers, only more questions. Altman left first, walking out into the humid night, and the air thick with the smell of distant rain. Hammond stayed behind, nursing another drink. When Hammond finally stepped outside, the streets were empty. Only the sound of distant waves filled the silence. Then came the headache, a piercing spike behind the eyes, a pressure, then a whisper. It was soft at first, then became louder. Come closer. Listen. He staggered, gripping a lamppost. The whispering swelled, like voices rising from underground, curling through the cracks in his mind. That was when the three men approached. Charles Hammond? One asked. We need you to come with us, for questioning. The whisper sharpened, drilling into his skull. Hammond stepped back. No, you're not taking me, he muttered, breathing hard. You're here to silence me. He turned and ran, footsteps thundering behind him. The man cut up quickly, surrounding him in a narrow street. Hammond, calm down. But he wasn't listening. The whispers drowned out everything. The pulse surged inside his head, vibrating through his bones. He pulled a pocket knife with trembling fingers and slashed at one of them, slicing deep into the man's wrist. They shouted. He barely heard them. Join us, join us, join us. He placed the blade against his throat. The man froze. Hammond's eyes widened. And then he dragged a knife across his neck. Blood sprayed across the pavement. His body collapsed. The three men stared at the corpse, horrified. By the time DredgerCorp arrived at the crater, the anomaly had become impossible to ignore. Their equipment, military grade and classified, was far beyond anything the local researchers possessed. They deployed the submersible at dawn. Hennessy and Dantic were the only crew aboard. A tight metal coffin hung with cables and cameras, slowly descending through the dark water that pooled inside the crater's ancient wound. The cabin lights flickered as the sub sank deeper. The world outside swallowed in blackness, except for the brief flashes of sediment drifting like ash. At first the men joked to ease their nerves, but it didn't take long before the headache started. A pressure that was deep inside the mind, crawling behind the eyes. "Feels like someone's drilling through my head," Dantic muttered, knuckles white on the controls. Hennessy didn't answer. His gaze had gone distant, fixed on the small porthole, as if something was floating just outside the glass. Then he whispered, "Shane?" Dantic froze. "What?" My brother," Hennessy said, voice crackling. "He's right there." But there was nothing outside except darkness. Seconds later, the drill struck stone. The hull shuddered. Dust and fragmented rock churned outside the viewport as the sub began grinding through layers untouched for millions of years. The anomaly's pulse grew stronger, louder. Each vibration rattled their bones. Shane, dead for years, stood in the cabin with Hennessy now, pale, eyes hollow. "Don't touch it," the apparition rasped. "Stay away from what's buried there." Hennessy screamed, stumbling back into the controls. Dantic grabbed him, shouting for him to get a grip, but his voice sounded distant, like he was being swallowed by the hum of the crater. The drill suddenly broke through. Light, black, oily wrong, bled through the crack in the stone as the artifact was revealed. A towering, obsidian monolith, etched with symbols that seemed to shift when unobserved. Shane looked at it with terror. "The black marker," he whispered. Dantic, already shaking, extended the core extractor through the opening. He was sweating so violently the tool slipped in his grasp. As he pressed the cutter against the surface, the marker reacted, not physically, but psychically. Shane convulsed. His flesh tore. He burst like a balloon filled with blood. The cabin was drenched. Hennessy collapsed, screaming in pure animal panic. Dantic yelled for him to get it together, but the words barely left his mouth before Hennessy snapped. Hennessy lunged with inhuman strength. Dantic, a decorated veteran of the lunar skirmishes, barely got an arm up before his skull was smashed against the console, again and again. Blood ran across the floor, mixing with the condensation. The marker pulsed, and Hennessy began to write. Symbols, alien, looping perfectly, flowing from him as if he were only a conduit. He smeared Dantic's blood across every flat surface. When he ran out of room, he stripped off his clothes and painted his own skin, dragging his fingers across his chest, arms, and face, until he was a tapestry of impossible geometry. He didn't breathe. He didn't blink. He only wrote. His oxygen gauge blinked red. He didn't see it. Shane appeared again, bloody. "You have to warn them," the apparition begged. Hennessy, shaking uncontrollably, turned on the recorder. His vidlog was a mess of rambling prophecies, warnings and screams. Desperate pleas he broadcasted across dozens of frequencies. The fragments of the message cut through static in labs. His eyes widened as the truth bloomed in his mind. The whispers grew soft. Hennessy collapsed, his breath slowed, and then his oxygen ran out. Silence filled the sub. By the time DredgerCorp hauled it back to the surface, both pilots were dead. The interior was coated in blood and symbols. No human being should have been able to write. The mission was a failure. But the broadcast was already out there. The vidlog spread like a virus. Not the whole recording, just scattered pieces. Fragmented by static and corrupted by the sub's failing systems. A scream here, a warning there. Glimpses of Hennessy's blood-smeared body, and the frantic symbols that covered the sub-interior. At first, people dismissed it as a hoax, but the scientists didn't. Within hours, academics, technicians, and amateur signal crackers across the region began stitching together the fragments, building a rough but horrifying sequence of events. Michael Altman was one of the first to see it, and something about Hennessy's trembling eyes, something about the awful symmetry of the symbols, told him the man had not simply lost it. This was connected to the anomaly, connected to the crater, to whatever DredgerCorp was digging toward in the dark. Altman knew better than anyone what happened to whistleblowers who spoke too loudly, so he made sure the voice wasn't his. He created an alias, compiled the most complete version of the vidlog available, and uploaded it to the net, and titled it the most direct and damning way possible. DredgerCorp submersible discovers unknown artifact. Pilot goes insane. He added details, location tags. He made sure there was no doubt where it had originated. When the video finally went live, DredgerCorp's executives panicked. They called a press conference, a rushed, carefully controlled spectacle held in front of bland corporate banners and muted press corps. Tanner, the company's operation manager and public face, delivered the official story with practiced calm. There was no artifacts, he insisted, avoiding the camera's glare. There was no dig. Hennessy simply suffered a psychological break while taking the sub on a routine test run. Corporation offered condolences, blamed stress, blamed equipment failures, blamed anything except the glowing monolith buried beneath the crater. For a brief moment, Altman wondered if they were right. He wanted to believe them. Wanted it to be a human error, or a glitch, or anything that didn't involve the symbols now burned permanently in his mind. But the longer he stared at the vidlog, the more wrong he everything felt. This was not a test run. This was not a breakdown. The men in the subs were responding to something intelligent. Altman closed his laptop. He needed to step away. He had done enough, more than enough. And now this wasn't his problem anymore. He resigned from the investigation. Hours after the press conference, Tanner, the same man who had smiled for the cameras, was found dead in his apartment. The walls were scratched with deep gouges, as if he tried to carve something into them before turning on himself. He'd slit his own throat, but not out of despair. Witnesses reported that he'd been mumbling to someone who wasn't there, fumbling with imaginary gloves, gasping about shared oxygen with Dantic, who had been dead for days, while claiming he was back on the lunar battlefield, trapped in the vacuum during the moon skirmishes. His final act, clumsy and horrific, was performed with the calm of a man convinced he was saving someone. Markov, a military colonel flown in after the scandal erupted, informed DredgerCorp President Lenny Small of Tanner's death without ceremony. "Your man was compromised," Markov said, "and this operation is beyond your control now." Small looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept since the sub came back up. Markov continued, "We have an oceanic research facility being towed in. It will anchor directly above the crater within 48 hours. I will command all operations from there." The crater was no longer just a corporate site. It was government priority. The morning after Hammond's death, Altman awoke to the pounding of fists on his door. Two officers, faces drawn tight, eyes hollow from the lack of sleep, ushered him out without introduction. Inside the station's single interview room, the fluorescent lights flickered. The officers asked the usual questions. How he knew Charles Hammond, why they had met, whether Hammond had been acting strange at the time he met him. Altman answered carefully, deliberately, measuring every word. He told them about the bar meeting, about Hammond's fears, the DredgerCorp's secrecy. He didn't mention the vidlog, the marker, and certainly he did not mention the hallucinations. But the officers were not fools. They sensed he was holding back. They pressed harder, asking about the upload, the alias, the timing. "Look," one said, leaning forward, "we just want to know if this has anything to do with that video going around." Altman didn't blink. "It doesn't," he lied. They watched him for a long moment, then released him with the warning, "Stay out of trouble. Stay away from DredgerCorp." But it was far too late for that. Ada met him outside, worry etched in her eyes. Beside her stood Chava, the young boy who had discovered the creature on the beach. His face was pale. His hands trembled slightly as he clutched a bundle wrapped in a tarp. "We thought you needed to see something," Ada said quietly. They walked back towards the shoreline. The air was thick and humid, the tide dragging sluggishly across the sand, as if the ocean itself were exhausted. Chava stopped at a small depression near the rocks. He knelt and pulled back the tarp. Altman stared. What lay beneath was a charred skeleton of the creature, the same one Chava and his mother had seen nights earlier. Scorched ribs arcing like fingers reaching skyward. The skull was elongated, cracked. No animal on Earth looked like this. Ada crossed her arms tightly. "It's not folklore anymore. The locals called it the Devil's Tail. The crater had a gravitational anomaly beneath it. A creature had washed up on the beach. The pilot in the corporate sub had gone insane. All the pieces were converging, pointing towards one truth. Something in the crater was waking up." Altman didn't sleep that night. The images haunted him. Hennessy symbols, Tanner's carved walls, the skeleton remains on the beach. By dawn, he made a decision. He drafted a formal request, long and detailed, and sent it directly to the North American Sector Science Foundation. He requested a full scientific investigation of the crater. It was the kind of request that crossed every line, the kind that would put him directly in DredgerCorp's crosshairs. When he hit send, his hand shook. He felt deep down that something terrible had been set into motion, something that could no longer be stopped. Altman had barely sent a grant request when he felt the air shift around him. A cold unease seeped into his bones. He'd crossed the line, an invisible one drawn not on paper, but in the minds of powerful men who wanted the crater kept quiet. It didn't take long for them to arrive. He was studying seismic readings at his desk when heavy boots thudded outside. His front door creaked open without a knock. A shadow blocked the hall light. Colonel Markov stepped inside. Behind him came 3 more men, military by posture, corporate by expression. DredgerCorp and the armed forces, shoulder to shoulder. A coalition masked as coincidence. Their presence felt like a verdict. Altman stood slowly. Markov looked him up and down with the cool detachment of a man assessing a broken instrument. "You've been busy, Dr. Altman." The others spread through the house, opening drawers, flipping through notebooks, scanning his equipment with handheld devices. One of them muttered, "He knows too much." Markov turned to Altman again. "Let's have a chat." They sat him in his own living room. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. Markov's questions are surgical, designed to open him up, peel back layers, expose everything he knew about the anomaly. Altman stayed calm. His voice never cracked, but the truth was written on his face. He knew far more than he should. The room fell silent. One of the men leaned toward Markov and whispered something sharp. Another shook his head. Finally, Markov straightened and spoke out loud. "He's too involved to discard, but he might still be useful." A tense pause. "Congratulations, Dr. Altman. You're joining the team." Before Altman could answer, the 2 men pulled him to his feet. The decision had never been his. They escorted him outside, past the neighbor's shuttered windows, into the humid night. A helicopter waited at the edge of town, rotors whispering like distant voices. Altman climbed aboard. The interior was cramped, humming with tension. When his eyes adjusted, he saw her. Ada, strapped into the seat. Worry etched across her face. She squeezed his hand, saying nothing. Behind her sat half a dozen Chicxulub researchers, biologists, chemists, engineers, looking like they'd been dragged from their labs and shoved into the sky. The helicopter lifted, sweeping out over the dark crater lake. Far ahead, light shimmered on the horizon. A massive silhouette took shape. Steel platforms, cranes, antennae. a floating research complex, towed into place by the military. "Welcome to Site Zero," someone muttered. As they drew closer, Altman could see teams already at work. Scientists from across the world, China, Russia, the EU, moving like ants across the deck. Hundreds of specialists, thousands of tools. Entire laboratories assembled atop the crater, as if preparing for war. The Global Brain Trust had been summoned, and Altman and Ada had been drafted into it. The helicopter touched down at the main pad. Soldiers waved them forward as sirens and machinery roared beneath their feet. Markov stepped beside him. "Dr. Altman, Dr. Chavez, consider yourself conscripted." Life aboard the floating research complex settled into a strange rhythm. Half science, half paranoia. The hum of machinery never stopped. The lights never truly dimmed. And beneath the metal plates of the decks, the pulse of the crater beat like a distant, buried heart. It was during this uneasy lull that Altman met Hendricks. The pilot was lean, sharp-witted, and disarmingly calm. The only man on the platform who didn't flinch when the subject of the failed DredgerCorp mission came up. He and Altman clicked quickly, forged together by curiosity in the isolation of the complex. Hendricks often joked that he lived inside the sub more comfortably than his own room. His co-pilot, Morbsby, was the opposite. Loud, slurred, and perpetually red-eyed. He treated the submersible like a bar stool, and liquor like oxygen. Everyone knew he was a risk. Hendricks knew it best. But he tolerated the man out of pity or habit. The tolerance came to an abrupt end. During a routine inspection, Morbsby stumbled onto the loading gantry so drunk he could barely strive a sentence together. The commanding officers threatened to revoke his clearance. Morbsby tried to defend himself, tripped backward, and vanished with a scream into the shadow depths of the maintenance shaft. The snap of the bone echoed for minutes. By the time they recovered the body, his neck was bent in an impossible angle. Markov decided this solved the Morbsby problem. Altman was a replacement. The training was brutal, cramped and disorienting. Navigating a steel coffin beneath crushing water pressure was nothing like geophysics. Still, Altman proved a quick study. Within days, Hendricks trusted him. Within a week, Markov approved him as an official co-pilot. "This time," Markov said, "nothing will go wrong." On the morning of the recovery mission, the sky was a sheet of iron. The sea churned as though resisting the descent. Hendricks was quiet, too quiet. As he strapped in, Altman performed the checks himself, making sure the sub was sound. They slipped beneath the waves. The darkness enveloped them instantly, broken only by the faint glow of their running lights and a sonar ping rolling through the abyss. Pressure groaned against the hull. The ruins of the previous submersible slowly came into view, lying crippled among the rocks and slit like the carcass of a metal beast. "Easy," Altman whispered. "Almost there." Hendricks didn't answer. "Hey," Altman nudged. You okay?" Hendricks' breath hitched. His grip tightened as he held the controls. Then he slowly turned towards Altman. His eyes were wrong. Glossy. "Michael," he rasped. "You're not supposed to be here." Altman barely had time to react before Hendricks lunged, swinging a wrench. The confined space turned the struggle into something animalistic, desperate. Hendricks screamed as if something else were inside him, pulling the strings. Altman got the upper hand only by instinct, slamming the emergency sedative injector into Hendricks' neck. The pilot collapsed, twitching, murmuring fragments of phrases that didn't belong to him. Altman didn't have time to recover. Something outside moved. He forced himself back into the pilot's seat, completed the magnetic latch, and began hauling the wrecked sub towards the surface. Inside the broken craft, the bodies of Hennessy and Dantic floated like grotesque puppets, twisted, swollen, and disintegrated by the pressure and time. The marker symbols on the walls looked freshly carved. Then something stirred outside the viewport. A fish, no, what used to be a fish, glided toward the murk. His body was contorted, reshaped, Torn open where bone had erupted from flesh. Another fish drifted near it, unaware, until the creature tore it apart in a burst of blood and shimmering scales. Altman's stomach lurched. He activated the vidlog. No one else would believe him otherwise. They resurfaced with their cargo, the dead pilots and the damaged sub. Inside the wreckage's sampling arm, a shard of the marker gleamed like a stolen piece of night. Altman pocketed it when no one was looking. On the outside of the hull, he found something else. Pinkish rubbery matter, clinging like diseased tissue. He scraped off a sample, storing it in a sealed container. He shouldn't have taken either. But curiosity had already replaced caution. Back on the platform, Hendricks was sedated and confined to sickbay. The scientific team had gathered to examine the pig matter, studying its strange elasticity, its warmth, its cell structures that didn't match any Earth organism. Altman kept the marker hidden. He locked it in his room and studied it alone. He couldn't identify the material. It wasn't rock, it wasn't metal. It was something else, something manufactured, but not by human hands. He touched it briefly. It vibrated, very softly. The screaming snapped him out of his trance. Sickbay. Altman ran, arriving just in time to see Hendricks, his friend, standing over the body of a nurse. Blood smeared across his hospital gown. His face twisted in agony and terror. "Hendricks!" Altman shouted. For a moment, just a moment, the pilot recognized him. Then the whispers, whatever they were, dragged him back into the madness. Security fired. Hendricks collapsed, eyes open, staring at nothing. Altman dropped to his knees. The loss hit harder than he expected. His friend had been normal just a few days ago. Now he was dead. And Altman could no longer pretend this was coincidence. Days blurred into one another on the research platform. Long hours of data, interrupted only by the deep, throaty hum of machinery and the constant vibration rising from the crater beneath them. The marker's pulse had become an ambient presence, like an engine under the metal flooring. And Altman kept going back down. Not because he wanted to, because no one else could. After Hendricks' death, Altman hoped Markov would suspend sub operations. Instead, the colonel had doubled them. "Find me another co-pilot," he barked at staff. Altman goes back down. What followed was a grim rotation. Some co-pilots lasted days, others hours. Each began their dives of professionalism and confidence. Each ended drenched in sweat, whispered nonsense, or clawing at cabin walls. One man grabbed Altman by the throat mid-dive, shrieking that Altman was blocking the voices. Another tried to crash the sub intentionally, convinced the marker would catch him before impact. A third refused to look at the sonar because he swore the dots were looking back. The worst incident came from a veteran engineer who calmly unlashed his harness and walked toward the hatch. "What are you doing?" Altman's voice trembled despite himself. "I have to let him in," the man murmured, smiling softly. "My father's outside. He's been knocking." There was no knocking. No one outside. Just the water. Just the crushing black water. Altman tackled him. The struggle was messy, desperate. By the time he subdued the man, the engineer wasn't breathing. Altman stared at the body for minutes, the sub humming around him, trying to feel anything but cold dread. When he resurfaced, Markov's only response was, "Good, at least you're reliable." Not all the co-pilots were disasters. Dr. Stevens, a psychologist specializing in deep pressure behavioral adaptation, joined Altman for several runs. She provided a rare reprieve from madness. She was calm, observant, able to redirect her anxiety into analytical focus. For a short time, Altman didn't feel alone. But even she began reporting symptoms. Dreams of symbols, voices behind her reflection, nightmares about drowning in black stone. Her clarity frayed, slowly but inevitably. Even she did not last. Altman began charting the timelines of each breakdown. It wasn't random, it wasn't stress, or psychological weakness. It perfectly correlated with the marker's pulse cycles. A stronger wave made a quicker descent into madness. A weaker pulse brought them minutes, maybe hours of sanity. Altman realized the awful truth. The marker had mind control properties. And worse, it was learning. Markov noticed something too. While everyone else deteriorated, hearing voices, seeing ghosts, losing their grip, Altman remained stable. Markov approached him after one mission. "You're different," the colonel said. Not a compliment, an accusation. Why? Altman didn't have an answer. Maybe it was his skepticism. Maybe the marker didn't know how to pry into a mind that refused to bend. Eventually, the research team decided to bring the artifact, the black marker itself, to the surface. Markov deployed his strongest subs for the job, and Altman, by now the most experienced and least compromised pilot, was assigned to assist the operation from a secondary craft. The descent was the worst yet. The marker's pulse hit them like a physical force. Altman's co-pilot only lasted minutes before trying to unseal the hatch and swim out to greet his waiting father. Altman barely stopped him. But he held course. Through trembling hands and a pounding skull, Altman watched Markov's recovery subs lash onto the enormous, obsidian structure. The marker rose through the black water like a monolith awaking from a nightmare. Altman felt pressure in his skull, thoughts that weren't his rising with it. He gripped the controls until his fingers ached. Almost there, he whispered to no one. The artifact broke the surface moments later, hoisted by cranes, dripping seawater like blood. The entire platform felt it. A tremor, a shift in the air, a whisper beneath consciousness. The black marker had arrived. The moment the black marker rose from the sea, something shifted aboard the research complex. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was subtle. Like the air pressure dropping before a storm, or a whispered word spoken behind closed doors. People walked differently, spoke differently. The hum of facility seemed to sink to a new rhythm, the marker's rhythm, and soon it had followers. At first, Altman thought it was just stress manifesting his delusion. But the believers, as they came to call themselves, grew rapidly. Scientists, engineers, technicians, all convinced the marker was more than an artifact. "It wants to help us," one said. "It will elevate mankind," murmured another. "It loves us," whispered a third, eyes glassy. The last statement chilled Altman the worst. It wasn't said like a metaphor. It was spoken with the kind of rapture usually reserved for saints or angels. Altman kept his distance, watching from the shadows of corridors and labs. But he couldn't avoid them forever. One evening, as he exited the geology bay, a group of believers stopped him in the hallway. Their faces were bright with a feverish glow. "You've seen it," one said. "You brought it up from the deep," said another. The woman grasped his hand. "You are its prophet." Altman recoiled. "I'm nothing of the sort." But their smiles only deepened. They believed him anyway. Ada was among them. His Ada. She stood behind the others, looking at him with a mixture of awe and devotion that made his stomach twist. "Michael," she whispered, "the marker speaks through you." He took a step back as though struck. "Not her, anyone but her." She touched his cheek gently. "You don't need to fight it. It chose you." But Altman did fight it. Every moment and breath. Because he had seen what the marker did to people who opened themselves to it. Men driven to insanity by its whispers. If this was love, he wanted no part of it. James Field, once a skeptic, had transformed into something worse. He followed Altman like a shadow, reciting passages from his own hastily scribbled holy notes, insisting Altman was a reluctant prophet of a new gospel. Altman despised him for it. Field's eyes burned with fanaticism, his voice trembling with self-appointed significance. "You were chosen, Michael," Field murmured, constantly. chosen to guide us. Altman wanted to punch him every time he spoke. The believers grew bold. They gathered around the marker's containment chamber, chanting softly, touching the glass, and praying. Their numbers swelled daily. Even those who were skeptical at first became entranced by the rhythmic pulse emanating from the artifact. The military was growing nervous. Tension snapped like a wire under strain. Field stood at the front of the mass of believers, arms raised toward the marker. When Cracks, the thick-necked enforcer who served as Markov's right hand, stormed into the chamber with the rifle. "Back away," Cracks barked. "Now." Field didn't move. He turned, slowly, as though staring at a child throwing a tantrum. "Brother," Field said, "you don't understand. The marker loves you." Crack. The gunshot echoed through the bay. Field dropped, clutching his foot, screaming as blood pooled onto the floor. A dozen believers rushed forward. Cracks raised his rifle, aimed at the marker itself. "You want to test me?" he growled. "I'll break your damned idol." Before anyone could stop him, he fired. The bullet struck the marker's outer surface. A ringing rolled through the chamber. The believers screamed in fear, not for themselves but for the artifact. They dropped to their knees, hands over their ears. Cracks fired again. "Get back," he shouted. The believers fell silent, completely silent. They stopped moving, stopped speaking. Their fate crumbled under the threat of physical damage to the sacred object. Cracks spat on the floor. "Good. Now we understand each other." The believers retreated. Altman stood in the corner of the room, trembling with something he couldn't name. Fear, helplessness, and a terrible sense that things were accelerating, spiraling, towards something none of them were prepared for. Altman never wanted to worship. He never wanted the looks of trembling reverence, the whispered prayers, the hands reaching out to touch his sleeves. But he used it. If the believers saw him as the marker's chosen messenger, then he would turn that delusion to his advantage. For the first time, if fanaticism worked for him, rather than against him. "Let him see it," Field urged, limping from his bandaged foot, bowing like a follower at a shrine. "Let the prophet bear witness." Markov's soldiers bristled, but they couldn't risk another riot, not now. The believers vastly outnumbered them, and everyone knew the facility was a powder keg, so Altman was escorted, reluctantly, towards the containment chamber. The doors unsealed with a hiss. The marker loomed in the dim red emergency lighting, its surface glistening like polished obsidian, carved in impossible geometrics that hurt the eye if one stared too long. Altman lifted his handheld recorder, pretending simply to study the artifact as a scientist. But he vidlogged everything. Every angle, every detail. The believers watched with awe. The moment he stepped out, Markov was waiting. "That's enough," the colonel growled. "You're done here, Altman." Two soldiers seized him by the arms before he could react. "He's non-essential now. Liability status. Get him on a transport." Liability. The word stung more than the restraints. Within the hour, Altman was flown back to the mainland, to the Chicxulub facility, a stark, windowless complex that reeked of hastily buried secrets. Ada was already there, having been removed earlier for her behavioral instability. Altman realized the guards locked him in the holding room. They were being silenced. However, the marker's influence did not stop at the platform. It reached across miles, across the water. The guards stationed outside the room began whispering to themselves. One muttered about a woman's voice calling his name. Another stared at a blank wall, claiming someone was standing beside him. By nightfall, one of the guards was sobbing uncontrollably. Another simply wandered down the hall, leaving his rifle behind, as though forgetting why he carried it at all. The locks clicked open. Not by command, but because the man assigned to keep them in prison had cracked. Their sanity dissolving from the pressure of the artifact, miles away. Ada grabbed Altman's hand. They ran towards the airport. By the time they reached Washington, D.C., every major news outlet had heard rumors. a scientist fleeing a Black Ops installation, a hidden dig site, whispers of alien technology, dead researchers. He stepped onto the podium in front of the Capitol, Ada beside him. Cameras clicked on like insects. Reporters shouted like a swarm. Altman took a breath, pulled up a vidlog, and hit play. The world saw the marker. He told them about the cover-up, the deaths, the anomalies, the military's role. He spoke the words no government wanted spoken. We have proof of alien life, and they tried to hide it. The world trembled. Half the population cheered, awestruck, half recoiled in fear, calling him a liar, a hoaxer. But the vidlog was real. The evidence airtight. The story spread across the globe within hours. And Colonel Markov, watching from the floating platform in the Gulf, felt his blood boil. His voice was cold as steel as he spoke into the secure channel. "Find him," Markov ordered. "Find Altman and stamp him out." Within 24 hours, Markov's people found him. Tracked him through surveillance cameras, triangulated through hotel reservations. They stormed the Watergate in the dead of night. The last thing Altman remembered was a flash of a stun baton. When he woke again, the smell of salt and oil told him everything. He was back, on the floating research platform. Ada was nowhere to be seen. Cracks greeted him with a smile that wasn't truly a smile, more like the bear's showing of teeth before a predator tears into a prey. "You made trouble," Cracks said. "Now you'll pay for it." Cracks asked questions he already knew the answers to. He accused Altman of treason, terrorism. He struck him when he didn't answer. Struck him harder when he did. Between blows, Cracks whispered things calculated to twist a knife. "She screamed a lot, you know. Maybe she begged faster than you did." Altman couldn't tell what was true. That was the point. Just when Cracks raised his baton again, the door slid open. Stevens stepped inside. "Cracks," she said sharply. "Stop. We need him." Her voice trembled only at the edges. She wasn't afraid of Cracks. She was afraid of what would happen without Altman. "The believers are panicking," she said. "They want their prophet." Cracks scoffed. "He's not a prophet." Stevens stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Maybe not, but they think he is, and we need calm." Cracks hesitated, then cursed. "Take him, but don't let him near anything important." Stevens didn't answer, because they both knew that command had already been broken. The moment he was out of the torture room, Altman used the chaos to slip away. Not to comfort the believers, but to return to the marker. He had seen what the missing shard did. He had theories about it, dangerous ones. He approached the containment chamber. The believers parted for him, like he carried the weight of scripture. The marker towered before him, glowing faintly. Altman reached into his coat and pulled out the shard. The stolen fragment recovered from the wrecked sub. The air vibrated as he raised it, as if the artifact recognized its missing piece. He tried to fit the fragment back into the slot. The marker pulsed, lights flickered. Something deep within the artifact stirred, something ancient and mechanical. Altman felt it reach for him. He yanked his hand back. Showalter, the meticulous German scientist, stepped up beside him. "It is like the Nautilus," Showalter murmured, eyes wide. "A living spire. Complex compartments, every functional on its own. Even broken, the organism survives." He tapped the containment glass. "The missing piece, it does not cripple it. It only unbalances it." Stevens nodded nearby, eyes gleaming strangely. Altman suddenly understood. She was a believer. Her kindness, her intervention, it wasn't loyalty to him. It was loyalty to the marker. Soon a theory spread across the researchers, half scientific, half religious. The marker was designed to bring eternal life, a gift for mankind, a blueprint for ascension. Others argued the opposite. No gift could be so violent, no salvation required so much death. To Altman, the truth was more terrifying. The marker was neither angel nor demon. It was an instrument. And instruments do not love their users. Grothgott, brilliant and extremely devout. had been working without sleep for days. He claimed he could decode the marker's genetic structure. He alone thought the messages were biochemical. And then he saw her. His grandmother, dead for 20 years, standing in his lab in the dress she was buried in. "Rot," she whispered. "You must stop it. You must contain convergence." Convergence? The words slid through the air like a blade. Driven half mad, Gal seized the vial of the experimental fluid, genetically unique, synthesized from sequences embedded within the marker structure. He thought it was a sedative. He plunged the needle into his arm. He screamed. His flesh writhed like something alive beneath it. His veins bulged. Skin tore as new structures pushed through. "Into the dead space," the grandmother's apparition urged. "You must stop convergence." Barely conscious, Gal staggered towards the marker's non-field perimeter. The dead space, where physics dimmed and the artifact's influence was muted. "Stop!" Brack shouted, arriving with 2 soldiers. "Step away from the artifact." Gal raised a trembling hand. "I must." Brack shot him in the head. Goat's skull snapped back, body collapsing into the metal grating. His mutated arm twitched twice before falling still. Soldiers grabbed the corpse by the shoulders and dragged it out of the dead space. Muttering about infection protocols, they covered him with a sheet. Altman had just started recording a vidlog meant for field. One last attempt to explain the marker's danger. The counteract the fanaticism spreading throughout the facility. That's when the screaming began. Not distant, close. He turned, startled, as 3 scientists ran into the room. Hideki Ishimura among them, face pale and trembling. 2 others stood frozen, staring at the medbay bed where Guff's shrouded body lay. The sheet rose. Something beneath it shifted, twitching. "Get back!" Ishimura gasped. It was already too late. The sheet tore upward in a spray of gore. The newly born infector unfolded like a nightmare. Its spine arched backwards, limbs ending in long, stinger-like appendages. One scientist screamed, then the infector pounced, its stinger plunging into the first man's chest with a sickening crack, and he convulsed violently. Bones snapped and stretched. The second scientist stumbled backward, only for another barbed limb to drive through his jaw. Ishimura bolted. He didn't look back, and Altman followed him. Behind them, the 2 dying scientists screamed as his bodies contorted, bones extending into blades, torsos splitting open to form grotesque rib cages. Their transformation into slashers was grotesquely fast. The necromorphs tore out the medbay and crashed into the labs. Scientists scattered like insects, but there was no escape. The creature's speed was inhuman, its hunger limitless. Altman saw one man lifted off the ground and pinned to the wall by bone scythes. Another was torn in half before he could even scream. A third transformed mid-flee, shrieking as his arms split into weapons. Security responded, but bullets only slowed the creatures. The entire complex dissolved into anarchy. Cracked radio channel was a wall of screams. Markov's orders were slowly being drowned out by panic. The lower levels fell within minutes. The infection spread upward. Nothing was stopping it. Amid the chaos, Altman forced his way toward the research wing, following a theory he had barely pieced together: the dead space. The orbital null field with the marker's psychic influence muted. Dangerous, yes, but stable. He found Harmon there, sitting cross-legged among the overturned lab equipment. "I stayed in the dead space," Harmon explained softly. "It protects you. The marker signal's weaker here. The creatures, they don't come close." Altman didn't know if Harmon was brilliant, or simply too far gone to realize he should be screaming like everyone else. Either way, they couldn't stay. Markov, Krax, and a handful of armed survivors fought their way to the top deck. They used emergency ladders and bypassed tunnels to reach the helipad, cutting down necromorphs with precision fire. Krax especially fought with brutal efficiency, as though making up for every sin he had committed. But they didn't even pause for Altman or the other researchers. They didn't even send a warning. They simply evacuated. A gunship lifted off the deck, rotors whipping through smoke and flame, leaving the complex and its dying personnel to burn. Altman didn't waste time cursing their names. Survival was all that mattered. What remained of the entire city of researchers? They raided a tool storage room and emerged wielding industrial plasma cutters, the only weapons capable of slicing through necromorph bone. What followed was the slaughter. Tight corridors choked with blood, alarms blaring, necromorph shadows flickering in the emergency lights. Slashes burst through the vents, and lurkers crawled along ceilings. Even the infected returned, leashing its infection on fallen guards. One by one, Altman's team died. The first survivor was dragged screaming into a maintenance shaft. Another was impaled by a bone blade through the sternum. Another tripped and was overrun, his plasma cutter carving into him as he fell. Field died worst of all. The elevator doors closed around his torso as a necromorph grabbed his legs. The creature pulled downward with inhuman force. His head tore off. Blood sprayed the walls like paint. Altman shut the elevator door on Field's corpse and dragged himself upward, tears streaming down his face, plasma cutter trembling in his hand. Eventually, the only footsteps Altman heard were his own. But somehow, through all that, Altman broke through the final bulkhead. He stumbled outside, where the emergency boats bobbed in the waves. The screams of the dying echoed behind him. He didn't look back. He got in the boat and sailed towards the dark horizon. Altman's boat scraped against the mainland dock as dawn bled orange across the water. The world looked peaceful, unaware that death was spreading behind him on steel decks now soaked in blood. The mainland Chicxulub facility appeared quiet, its windows dark, doors unguarded. But Altman knew better. He had seen the complex fall from within. There was no time to waste. He needed to warn anyone left alive, find Ada, and stop the outbreak before it reached civilization. He burst through the main doors. A security man stepped forward immediately. "Dr. Altman, please come with us." The tone was too calm, too rehearsed. Behind him, more guards emerged from the shadows. Their weapons were drawn but held loosely. Not as if they feared a threat, but as if they expected one from him. "There's an outbreak on the platform," Altman said. "Neurotic mutation. Whatever we've been studying has breached containment." The guards exchanged a slow, almost bored look. "That's not your concern anymore," the lead one said. "Orders are to bring you in quietly." 2 more stepped closer. Altman backed up. His fingers brushed the plasma cutter, holstered at his hip. The only thing that's kept him alive. "I'm not going with you," he said, voice steady in a way to surprise even him. One guard reached out to restrain him. Altman fired. The blast struck the guard's forearm, severing it cleanly. The man shrieked, stumbling back as the limb fell to the floor in a smoking heap. Alarms blared as Altman fled deeper into the facility. His hands shook from adrenaline and guilt. He'd killed a man. Maybe not fatally, but close enough. And for what? For survival? For Ada? Ada. He whispered her name without thinking. And then she was there, standing at the far end of the room, glowing faintly, her hair drifting weightlessly as if underwater. Eyes filled with warmth he had never seen from the real Ada, only imagined. "Michael," she whispered. "I'm here." Michael froze. His breath caught. His heart sank. He understood now. The marker only created visions of the dead. It had shown Hennessy his brother, and now it showed him Ada. He stepped closer, his face blurred, wavered. "You can still save them," she said softly. "You can still fix everything." But when Altman blinked, she disappeared, fading like smoke in a breeze. His knees buckled. Ada was gone, truly gone. And the marker wanted him alive. Why? To guide him? Or to use him? He didn't know. But that grief hardened into resolve. There was nothing left to lose. "Altman!" The voice snapped him out of despair. Chava, older now, was still carrying the haunted look of someone who had seen the impossible far too young. "Come with me," the boy panted. "Hurry!" Altman followed. He didn't have another choice. Chava led him through the employee corridors and forgotten stairwells until he reached a sealed maintenance hatch. Inside was something Altman never expected. A hidden cache of weapons. Not modern rifles or precision tools. Industrial cutters, explosives, impact drills, bone saws. A survivalist dream. Chava pushed the crate open, revealing ammunition and blades. "Take what you want." Altman scanned the weapons. The guns were slow to reload. Explosives were probably unpredictable. But the chainsaw, he lifted it. It was heavy, brutal, and elegant. A weapon that required being close. Very close. Chava stared. "Why that?" he asked, confused. Altman looked him in the eyes. "Because I've seen what we're fighting." Altman commandeered a small skiff and pointed it back towards the offshore research facility. The sea churned beneath him as if trying to pull him under. But he kept going. The steel silhouette of the floating complex grew larger on the horizon. Smoke rising from the holes torn in the superstructure. Lights flickering, and alarms still faintly echoing across the waves. It was a tomb, an necropolis floating on the Gulf. Altman stepped onto the deck with the chainsaw in hand. The wind carried faint whispers. The markers, curling like cold fingers against the back of his skull. He was here to understand, to find out what the marker wanted, and to stop convergence before it happened, or die trying. Because if he failed, humanity would join the fate of the dead. The whole structure felt hollow, dead. But it wasn't dead. Nothing here ever stayed dead. He gripped the chainsaw tighter and tapped his communicator. "Harmon, are you there?" Static. Then a whisper. "Altman, you came back." "I'm here," Altman replied. "Where are you?" "In the death space, near the marker. You must avoid the main corridors. They're full, completely overrun." "Tell me how to get to you." There was a pause, and Harmon spoke with urgency. "Go underwater through the submarine bay. The doors are sealed from the infection, mostly. Swim under the bulkheads. It's the only path with fewer of them." "Fewer, but not none." Altman grimaced. Understood. He killed the channel and moved towards the access hatch. Blood smeared in long arcs along the walls, as if the bodies had been dragged. A severed arm twitched faintly, reanimated nerves firing reflexively. The marker's whispers vibrated in his skull. The submarine bay was a cathedral of rust and echoes, half-flooded. Its blood water reflected the crimson emergency lights. Something floated near the surface, shredded lab coats and torn limbs. The stench was overwhelming. The bay doors were sealed tight, and the only way forward was down. Altman set the chainsaw aside, sealing it in a waterproof bag. He slung it across his back, took one last breath, and dropped into cold water. It engulfed him instantly, icy, thick with debris. He swam deeper, pushing past drifting corpses and kelp-like strands of mutated flesh. The silence underwater was broken only by the pounding of his heart. His headlight cut through the murk, revealing the underwater bulkheads, half open, jammed by something organic wedged in the tracks. A severed head, elongated, opened its jaw and screamed silently at him through the water. It was part of something larger, a skittering, disjointed cluster of limbs and spines clinging to the door. He kicked hard and slipped through, scraping his shoulder against metal. He surfaced on the other side, gasping and shivering. He wasn't alone. Something lurked on the walls of the cargo bay hallway. Fat, pale shapes clinging to the ceiling with spiked legs. Their heads dangled loosely, for sinew threads, as though they were detachable. When he stepped forward, one of the heads snapped loose, stretching on a ropey tendon before dropping. It scuffled toward him across the deck. Altman swung his boot, sending it tumbling. Another head detached, then another. They swarmed. Altman grabbed an old chemical sprayer from a maintenance crate, filled with flammable solvent, and ignited the nozzle with the sprayer he carried. A makeshift flamethrower. A plume of fire roared across the corridor. The spider-like abomination shrieked, curling and blackening as fire consumed their limbs. The stench of burnt flesh filled the hall. The survivors climbed the walls and retreated into the vents. The entire deck groaned, as if something enormous shifted beneath the metal. Altman aimed the chainsaw ahead, the motor humming in his grip. A thunderous crash echoed from the dark. Then it emerged. A brute, massive, stitched together from bulk muscle and bone. Its armored shoulders scraping the ceiling. Two disproportionate arms, one thick as a vehicle's tire, dragged behind it, dripping blood. It charged. Altman dove aside as the beast slammed into the bulkhead, denting steel like paper. The brute roared, a guttural animal sound that vibrated through the deck. Altman scrambled to his feet and ignited his flamethrower. A blast of fire hit the monster's side. It staggered, but did not fall. Fire clung to his exposed muscles. The necromorph felt no pain. It lunged again. This time Altman swung the chainsaw. The blade screamed as it tore into the brute's unarmored flank. Black ichor sprayed across his chest. The monster howled, thrashing violently, smashing him against the wall. His ribs cracked, his vision blurred. He held the chainsaw steady, forcing it deeper into the exposed joint. Bone shattered, muscle tore. The brute collapsed, twitching violently as its enormous body fell into the waterlogged corridor. The metallic crash. Altman staggered past it, coughing blood. He had no time to rest. He pushed onward, carving a path through darkened halls filled with echoing screams and twitching shadows. Necromorphs prowled every vent and corner, but he avoided most, ducking into storage ducts, bypassing nests, slipping through machinery rooms to reach the lower deck. Finally, he reached the threshold of dead space. Here the air stilled. The whispers grew quieter. Even the necromorphs hesitated to enter. And at the far end of the chamber, silhouetted in dim orange light, the black marker towered. Harmon stood beneath it like a worshipper under a cathedral spire. "You made it," Harmon whispered. Altman stepped forward, chainsaw dripping. "This ends tonight," he said. The marker pulsed an answer. Slow, deliberate, like a massive heartbeat echoing from another world. Altman walked towards it. Harmon trailed behind Altman as they entered the dead space around the marker, walking with an eerie, trance-like obedience. His footsteps were soft, shuffling, his eyes glazed with the empty devotion of someone who has surrendered every piece of himself. "Altman be praised," Harmon whispered, again and again. Every few steps like a ritual, like a mantra. Altman flinched every time he heard it. "Stop saying that," he muttered. But Harmon didn't listen, or couldn't. He simply followed, head bowed, hands clasped, trailing behind Altman like a chained shadow. The marker towered above them, its polished black surface humming with the alien resonance. Strange crimson and violet glints ran across its geometric grooves, almost like veins. Altman felt its pull. He stepped forward and touched it. The instant his fingers brushed the marker's surface, the world vanished. "Stay away. Prevent convergence. Destroy it." These were not visions. It was a psychic scream. But it wasn't coming from the marker at all. It came from inside humanity. An evolutionary alarm bell embedded in the human brain, like a fossil of trauma older than the civilization itself. The marker wasn't warning them away. Humanity was warning itself. Something ancient and terrified within the human mind was pushing back against the artifact's influence. The hallucinations, the warnings, they were defense mechanisms, not divine messages. Altman staggered back from the marker, gasping. His mind reeled with realization. The marker wasn't trying to cause convergence. It was responding to fear. Human fear. But beneath that, something else pulsed. desire. The marker wanted one thing: replication. Altman had gathered research on his way to the collapsing facility. Loose papers, scattered data pads. He memorized rhythms, echoes, mathematical structures. The marker wasn't just a monolith. It was an instruction set. A blueprint. A machine begging to be copied. Harmon watched from behind, smiling faintly. "Altman be praised," he murmured. Altman ignored him. He approached the command console near the containment ring, one of the few systems still functional, and patched into the marker's transmission grid. "All right," he whispered to himself. "This is what you want, isn't it?" He entered the replication codes he reconstructed. Sequences of symbols. A complete instruction map. When he transmitted it, the marker shuddered. Its glow intensified, rising, again and again, then abruptly dimmed. Silence. Harmon gasped, "You've pleased it." Altman wasn't so sure. But for the first time since its discovery, the marker felt quiet. No more whispers. No more psychic pressure. Just stillness. Altman swallowed. Now it's time to shut it down. Harmon panicked as Altman began activating the collapse structure for the containment platform. "What are you doing? Stop! The marker must be preserved." Altman turned to him slowly. "The marker spoke to me," he lied. "It said it needs a rest. It wants to sleep at the bottom of the ocean, far from human minds." Harmon froze. Confusion flickered across his face. Devotion warred with fear, but ultimately he obeyed. He backed away. "Altman be praised," he whispered, trembling. Altman went to work. He sabotaged the buoyancy generators, triggering structural detonations across the keel. The billion-dollar facility groaned. Metal plates bending as the platform began to tilt. Waves surged across the deck, washing blood and debris into the sea. Below, the marker stood motionless, as water rushed upward around it. Altman made it to an escape stairwell, just as the floor collapsed behind him. He turned back once, just once. The marker stared at him. Silent, half submerged and sinking. Not resisting at all. It just accepted its descent to the abyss. For the first time since humanity uncovered it, the marker was gone. Altman watched the facility tore apart, collapsing into the gulf like a dying gasp of some colossal beast. Fire met water, metal screamed, and the infection drowned beneath tons of salt water. It was finally over. Altman had barely stepped onto the boat, exhausted from sinking the marker in the entire facility, when Harmon's whispered chant changed pitch. No longer awed, but feverish. A shadow passed behind Altman. "Altman be praised," Harmon said once again, and swung. He woke, bound to a steel table. Steven stood beside him, whispering prayers under her breath. Markov loomed behind her, hands clasped behind his back. The colonel's face was different now, calmer, lit with an inner glow Altman recognized with horror. The glow of belief. "Good morning, Dr. Altman," Markov said softly. "You have done well." Altman spat blood. "Where's Ada?" Markov smiled. "I thought you already knew. Krax killed her." "Krax is dead too, of course. Expendable assets are always... Well, we repurposed him anyway. He became something new, something better." Steven stepped forward. "You shouldn't fear death, Michael. Not now that you understand. The marker is divine. It brings dead flesh to life. It is the origin of evolution itself. And when we perfect the process, when the next marker comes, death will end." Altman stared at her in disgust. "You're insane." "No," Stevens whispered. "We are chosen." Markov leaned closer. "Do you know why I'm telling you all this? Because you won't be alive much longer. But your name, your story, will live forever." Altman's eyes widened. "We're founding a religion," Stevens said softly. "In your honor," Markov added. Altman recoiled. No, you can't." "You were perfect," Stevens whispered. "A reluctant prophet, a martyr, a man who touched a divine artifact." We will tell the world you sacrificed yourself to save mankind. Markov chuckled. The media spin will be glorious. You'll be remembered as a saint, the founder of a new faith, unitology. Altman's stomach dropped. And all of it, Markov continued, will be a lie. A lie fueled by your death. Altman screamed in rage and grief. Ada was gone, his name was corrupted. Everything he fought for was stolen. 2 soldiers dragged Altman into a makeshift arena. Metal walls with dripping pipes. A twisted shape crawled out of the shadows. Cracks, or what had been once cracks. Now a grotesque necromorph fusion. Bone scythes protruding from swollen arms. A guard tossed something at Altman's feet. A spoon. Markov's voice echoed over the speakers. A fitting tool for a prophet. The creature roared and charged. Altman fought with desperation, slashing, screaming as the monster's cracks tore into him. He stabbed the creature's eye socket, blinding it with frantic strikes. But in the end, he lost. Cracks' scythe slammed into him, throwing him against the wall. He fell to the floor, bleeding out, still holding the bent spoon. His last thought was of Ada. Markov and Stevens stood over Altman's body. "Clean it up," Markov said. Stevens gazed at the corpse of the man she believed chosen. "We will make him immortal." And they did. Not through resurrection, but through myth. They fabricated sermons, painted Altman as a visionary martyr who discovered the divine marker and was murdered by the government forces trying to suppress the truth. They erased the markers, they erased the horrors, the necromorphs, the deaths, their own crimes even. And from the lies, unitology was born. A religion founded on fabrication, fueled by obsession, driven by complete misguided belief in the marker's purpose. As Altman's body cooled in the dark, his name rose to global prominence. The prophet, the martyr, the first marker witness. Praise be his name, our savior of mankind, Saint Michael Altman.